Hello, everybody. Welcome to another installment of Show Review with Mike G, the show of life, the show of mezcal, the show of Mexico, the show of corn. The shutdown's been difficult for all of us, but maybe you've picked up a trade. Personally, for me, I've gone all in on corn. That's right, and why this episode is so important to me as I sit down with the founder of Masienda, Jorge Gaviria. We sit down and we talk about NYU, we talk about the terrible things that have happened in this country this week. It was really a timely chat, and I always thought about canceling, as I mentioned in the conversation. But you know what? I love what Jorge is doing. I love Masienda. He's turned me into a fan, and he's had such a cool life so far, and he's just starting. You know, Masienda is at the helm of corn culture in America, but globally, it's going to happen too. So without further ado, I hope you guys enjoy this great chat with Jorge Gaviria.
In our lives, there's no bigger moment to talk about media, culture, and communication than today. And having that background at NYU for your BA, how does today make you feel? Because these are things you studied for years.
Yeah. And are we talking about the events of yesterday particularly, or
particularly? We can talk about social discord, justice, but just specifically about the insurrection yesterday.
Yeah, it's I think unfortunately it's a long time coming. It's been in development for as long as we've been using social media, and the danger of echo chambers. I mean, nothing that anybody at this point doesn't know. I was kind of just watching Fox News. I kind of always flip between kind of liberal and conservative media just to kind of understand where the conversation lies at any given time. And it's amazing. I mean, there's like a backlash happening now against Trump being taken off of Twitter or suspended from Twitter. And then, there's talk about a conservative Twitter coming up. I'm like, God, that's brilliant. Of course, that's the natural response to that. Of course, it terrifies me at the same time, but I just think it's amazing how rapid things are changing and how rapid the infrastructure is changing to support conversations, large, small, good, and bad. And obviously, as a result of yesterday, it's very heavy. I don't know what to say. It's the more I think about it and digest it, the more just kind of painful it is that so many people feel angst, like one way or another,
Yeah. I have been crying a lot lately, but like spontaneously. It's almost ridiculous, but there's something about what I feel towards other people, true empathy, which I think lacks in a lot of people. But for you, having such an investment in other cultures, whether I believe Italy to some degree in Mexico and stuff, do you feel this too? Because we probably are doing pretty good. I saw you guys were shipping a whole lot of stuff from Masienda, so maybe professionally we're doing good, but emotionally there's this massive grayness. Do you feel that too?
Yeah, I think I did. I felt it certainly at the beginning of COVID, and definitely as the conversations around racial inequality have continued to swell, particularly in the summer. I sort of, my breaking point was around then. Lots of spontaneous tears and kind of cathartic, just crying. But I think also it's been a large year of transition for me. I'm getting off topic here, but just spiritually, I think I've embraced a lot more practices or practice in general to help me stay sort of attuned to kind of what are we talking about here? What are we talking about in the greater scope of humanity? What's happening? These are just these are social, cultural contractions that are happening that, they happen. And I think the biggest mantra I've had of 2020 and now into 2021 is just resistance is suffering, resistance of what's happening and kind of denial of what's happening is going to lead to more suffering personally. So just working through those motions, working through it as opposed to around it has been the most helpful thing. And coming out on the other side with empathy for everybody, including folks who I disagree with. Obviously love the people, not the behavior. And I think that's been something to think about a lot.
But in that case, for me, health and eating right now, I will be the first to admit I drink a good bit of things, but I eat well and I work out, but for you, what is the ground? Because it sounds like cognitively you have entered another chapter of acceptance or processing or analysis, but what keeps you grounded when everything is so noisy?
Man, I think there's some personal stuff there. I think I grew up in a loving household, but also like a really confused one. My parents, were dealing with a lot between drug addiction and, addictions of all kind, frankly. A pretty tumultuous relationship, divorce. And so I kind of think like I grew up in a lot of sort of upheaval, it felt like, and I've been able to manage it internally. Maybe it's like a stoicist's approach to it, but I think, I think just keep in perspective each day is all we can do. It's a daily practice. And I still try to do that and refine the skill as much as I can, even though I feel like there's some sort of piece of me that's like somewhat used to, a little bit of conflict and managing through conflict.
I think that's really interesting. I played live music for a long time, and
I'm jealous.
I never worked in a kitchen though. That's still on my list. I'm still meant to do that. But what you don't notice, even though I wore earplugs for most of those days, if you really pay attention, I can hear the ring in my left ear. And it's only when you focus on what you're really feeling that, one, you get used to that abrasive noise. To your point, maybe this undercurrent of instability, not because of you, but because of these external factors. But you just then you realize what you're really dealing with, the deck.
Yeah.
And so, all right, so let's talk a little bit about Miami. You were born in Miami or born in Florida?
That's right. Yeah, I was born in Miami, Florida. Back late 80s, baby.
Late 80s. I'm 1980. I think you're like 32?
33, yeah, in 1987.
July 21st, something like that? I can't remember.
Well, man, gosh, the internet's scary.
Well, I just have a weird, I can just remember dates and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, if you look at your resume beyond this latest chapter of entrepreneurialism, which I definitely want to talk about, it's steeped with appreciation for other cultures and, of course, food. So that love of food, does that come from, is what you claim is like a tumultuous household? Did it come from that, or was that somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, man, I feel the intimacy here, man. So I'm going to go into it. I think in my case, it actually it's something I discovered recently. Food was a big part of my early infancy. My mom wasn't producing enough naturally to feed me, and she didn't even know that for weeks. So I was chronically hungry. It's like a sob story. It's not a big deal. I'm fine. I think there was this natural desire to know where my next meal is coming from, at a very, very early age. And so, at the end of the day, that sort of evolved into, you're going back and forth between parents' houses, and my dad was definitely doing the bachelor thing. And I wasn't quite sure what we were going to eat. It wasn't as comfortable, going to my mom's house where it was much more, it was much more of a homey experience, a maternal, instinct that she had. I kind of just really saw food as a vessel of comfort and pleasure, and one that I think my identity really became linked with.
Wow.
I would go in any transition, that was just something that was always there. And I felt like I wanted to develop a sort of a more deep, intimate understanding of how to survive, and not just survive, but the major vessel, or I should say the major lever in my life for pleasure at that time was always food. So it's I kind of felt like I had this moral obligation, or this strong instinct to want to learn how to fend for myself, and not just fend for myself, but thrive, enjoy, create something that I could be responsible for my own pleasure in a way.
Wow.
I don't want to leave that to chance.
Don't leave the next meal to chance.
Yeah.
Going back to your mother and father, did they have any background in food or being entrepreneurs?
No, I mean, well, in their own ways. I mean, my mom didn't go to college, and she sort of tumbled along. I doubt my mom's ever going to hear this, so I feel pretty okay talking about her. She sort of just like tumbled forward, got married really young, eloped at 18, divorced when she was like 20. So she had a bit of a chaotic upbringing. Food was just sort of something I think she was good at, but she never really fully honed. She was good at it relative to my dad, so I just sort of gravitated toward that. My dad was an attorney, and kind of always expected me to go to law school. And then finally, when I like told him one day after reading Danny Meyer's book, and I kind of had this like precedent for not going to law school, and Danny Meyer talks about like, he took the LSATs, and his aunt and uncle were like, "Why the hell are you doing this? We should be doing what you love." And he's like, "I have no idea what that is." And they're like, "It's food, man. Like, just pursue your passion of food." I showed my dad that, and I was like, "I'm going to do this too. Here's my whole plan." And he was like, "Well, your grandfather, my dad, was an entrepreneur and had all of these restaurants that he started in Cuba, and before that in Spain." And I was like, "Wait, what? Why you're telling me this now? Like, it's a little late, man." So apparently there's that runs through the family in some way, but it was sort of later in life that I discovered that.
It's weird I like to think I come from this spontaneous thing that happened in the universe, and I am who I am. Mm-hmm. But then if I go and I look back, and I have a distillery, and then if you think about that, that's directly linked to the hospitality industry because they're my customer. And like, well, where did I get that from? Well, my mom was a nurse. Okay, well, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Nurturing. Yeah. And then I find out to share as well, I've never met my father. Mm-hmm. And I love being in front of camera and acting and stuff like that, even though I've done other things. That's what he was. He was like a news anchor. So I'm like, God damn it. I thought I built these skills myself, but we can polish them, and to use your word, we can hone them.
Yeah. Gosh, nature's so strong, man. I kind of take that for granted too, but it is just as much a force as nurture.
And when we stop recording, I have something to share about that, because I completely agree. And it's unscientific, but it's family, and you can see it.
Yeah.
So many things to do. You could have just went to New York and not gone to school, but for you, was that academic pursuit maybe more of a reason to go to New York?
Man, I think honestly, when I was in high school, I just didn't know what I was doing. I think there was a lot of, I think related to that, like tumultuous back and forth. I was sort of trying to just kind of become whole on a very basic fundamental level. And it's been taking me a lot of time to do that. I wasn't as really, I was lucky because my best friend that I grew up with across the street in Miami in high school, he was incredibly well-to-do, and like he had a nuclear family who was really pushing him to, keep his head down in school. And so like I kind of just got lucky with that sort of peer group, and by I mean like individual, really, that I had an opportunity to kind of just follow and make sure I was keeping some kind of course as time went by. No, I stayed. Gosh, I had a girlfriend in high school that evolved into a college girlfriend, same person. And like, I kind of just like, my priority was staying close. She was a year younger than me, so I stayed close to the nest in Florida. I went to University of Florida for a year, and I was miserable. Oh, wow. And then, I'd always wanted to get out of state. And, my dad was like, all that really matters is law schools. Just like focus on, saving some money, and like, you'll get a law school and you'll kind of do it right then. And I was like, I actually don't want to do that. Like, I really need to be in a place that's like just on my own, independent thought and challenged. And New York was like, I think the only option for me. For some reason, I couldn't imagine any place else to be. So academics were actually secondary to that. It was more just like exposure. I needed to get out of the nest,
Did you, that was the thing I was going to ask you is, we traveled domestically quite a bit as I was a kid. Mm-hmm. So, I'm not really, I moved every 4 years, moved all over the place, but was that a part of your upbringing, or was it because you didn't have a chance to explore all the things, even in America, different places, that you're like, New York, that'll be the richest experience culturally I can have? I mean, so in other words, did you guys travel at all when you were younger?
Yeah, in fact, like, my dad was really into like RV culture. So, it was just like he got a van, and I didn't know what was happening on a summer or a Christmas break, and like he'd pick me up outside of my mom's house, on Christmas, and like we'd end up in Wyoming.
Oh wow!
Like, a week later, and I was like, wait. Without any knowing of like what was going to happen, it sort of just occurred that way. Sorry, my dog's having some water in the background.
That's
cool. So yeah, I mean, like there was a lot of domestic travel, and I feel pretty lucky. I mean, my dad's a very adventurous person, and he exposed me to parts of South America. One of my favorite earliest trips is we went to Venezuela, and a friend of his is, like he sort of grew up in a native community in Venezuela, very, very removed from kind of any city, like very much in the Amazon. And it was just like a very profound experience to sort of see and integrate into that lifestyle for even a time, so moments like that for sure helped shape it. I mean, we went to Cuba, and understanding just how complex that culture was and has become, my parents' generation alone, it was wild. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I wish I had a little more of that when I was a kid, but single mom and stuff, there's not the time nor the financial needs. You totally understand that.
For sure. So, no, my mom was not leading those trips.
Yeah. It's dad lawyer. That's probably a little bit of money there.
It helps.
Definitely helps. So this journey then kind of treks. So one thing I thought was funny, and this was I think probably 2011, 12 maybe. But there's a video of you at NYU.
Oh my God! Yeah.
Have you seen this thing?
Oh yeah, I've seen it. Can't get out the internet.
And I was, because I always wonder where the people that I interview, where they come from, because that's what defines us. I mean, and the little truck stops across the journey, I guess you could say. But it seems like you're a super cultural, arty guy. Is that fair to say?
Thank you. I think the more attuned to myself I get, the more I realize that like my MO is understanding and analyzing and affecting culture. So I didn't know that as a kid, but I think there were definitely proclivities as early as like a young boy. I appreciate you saying that. I'm sure a lot of it being in college, especially, it's an affectation. You're just trying to fit in and like sound great to your professor who you're totally in love with and like all that stuff. But I think it's hard to not. Living in New York, it's such a melting pot of cultures. Truly, I mean, like Miami, I always thought was, because it's considered to be like, it's just like this Latin, experience of like, people say it's like even a third world country, famously, infamously. You get to New York and like, no, this is really something. This is like a petri dish of humanity here. So, I was just fascinated by it. And I think like that's where certainly I started to really kind of pay attention to like what I cared about, and culture is a big part of that.
To go kind of down that art path just for a second, because it's New York's obviously steeped in art, whether it's art or film. Are those things that inspire you now, whether it's film or whether it's music or art? Do those things kind of fill your sails, so to speak?
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, my wife kids around with me. I mean, she's like, I'm a human, walking Wikipedia. It's like if I see a film or start going down the rabbit holes, especially musicians, like music's probably my first love that I never haven't had a chance yet to really fully develop. I'll spend days and days, weeks of just like understanding everything I can about that artist, where they come from, what was their big break, like, how did their compositions change over time? I just like love that. I think that's like, for me, one of my favorite ways to self-educate is just kind of learning through these people's stories and like seeing how they're able to channel creativity in moments of adversity, and when it's certainly not, it's not all glamour. I'm addicted to those stories.
Dude, that's how I taxonomize or taxonify. Mm-hmm. So I'll watch a movie. This happens a lot now, that I'll go back and listen to a record that I love the sound of it. And I'm like, okay, this is a great record. And I revisit. I'm like, oh, I really like this other one too. Different bands, different parts of the country, same producer. Mm-hmm. Like there's this artery through the aesthetic that I appreciate. And one of the things, talking about stories, and I'm by no means a Goya expert, but when he started to lose his senses, how the painting became so much more morbid and delusional almost.
Yeah.
These,
wow.
So many amazing stories like that. So I really feel like we share that in common. But, let's talk about corn, because there's such a striking parallel between corn and agave. And this story, which sounds like you were at the right place at the right time, translating Spanish, or was it Italian?
It was Spanish. Yeah. And I think there was one Brazilian chef. So like I was trying to, get some Portuguese across when he couldn't find the right word. And it was a hodgepodge of things going on.
And this becomes an aha moment for you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had started working at Blue Hill at Stone Barns. My foray into cooking started in education. I started kind of working with middle school students at an at-risk middle school in Brooklyn, and found myself incorporating more kind of a culinary curriculum. It's one of the easiest ways to bake in math. Literally, you're sort of working with ratios and things like that. And I started paying attention to that. That's when I decided not to go to law school. Went to Italy for a year, worked on a farm and butchering sort of program there in the most sort of like pristine traditional state, and fell in love with it. And kind of, my journey ended up leading me to this moment of like, all right, I know I want to work in food. I don't think that that's going to be in a restaurant, because, to me, like I really wanted to be a part of that community, but like add something to it. In a way that was sort of supplementing it and not trying to, compete in any way. The conversation at Blue Hill at that time, especially, was around this idea of like, it's sort of a playbook now, but like at the time it was very revelatory in the sense that, we've grown up, this generation, depending on certain ingredients and staples that we have no connection with at all, and obviously like the farm to table movement, the organic movement, Shape and East, like lots of restaurants have been informing this over the decades, but like, this was a really critical moment in the conversation where people were starting to really understand, like, it's not just like farm to table. We're talking about like holistic ways of working with farms, and supporting the whole range of agriculture that makes corn or whatever possible. Based on healthy soil, and just like unpacking this and taking a real regenerative, sustainable approach to it. It was just like, it was a big, big moment. And I was like, man, that's what I want to do. Like I'd had that experience, that sort of same spark in Italy, where I was just like, my gosh, this is what free range means. When you're like,
what kind of protein was it, by the way, in Italy? I was curious.
Pigs. Yeah, they were pigs. Primarily, that we worked with a couple different, breeds of animals, but yeah, I was just like, this is what free range is, man. When you're just like stacking rocks in the middle of a forest, to create a gate, some type of structure to prevent, like that 100 acres from being totally, compromised, that these animals are grazing on. So yeah, I think that same moment happened when I was at Blue Hill, and I just thought, this is the future. Everybody's going to be thinking about this in this way. It's behind the scenes enough. It's intellectually satisfying to me. Like I want to figure out a way to make a staple, come to light in a sort of a new way for this new generation, sort of way of thought. That's a rambling way of saying, like, I basically, like, I was ready to not work in a restaurant anymore, start a business, and I wanted to do it around food and supply chains.
Which what's really fascinating too is when you start talking about almost crawling. Like an artist, right? You crawl their work, you crawl the events in their life. It makes so much sense that what is you as an intersection point with like education in food, then turns into culture in food, then turns into who makes the thing, and that, you know what I mean? Like, like totally end to end. And it's really fascinating, because I think, again, that follows maybe the mental model that you have for stuff.
Yeah.
It's great.
It's wild. You did that much more eloquently than I could.
The first time, just self-professed, the first time I've ever made any connection between one thing and another. But I want to talk, this is the thing too that I found fascinating, is that I'm getting into, because of you, and I don't know if you know Dr. Ivan Saldana. He works for Montelobos, Mezcal, Abasolo whiskey. Really wonderful mentor and friend. But
not personally, but definitely.
You guys, do you think we're all going to go out to Hilotepec at that distillery for Abasolo? Yeah. We have to. But
oh man,
yeah, one of the things that he introduced me to was nixtamalization. And I didn't really know how to do it, but I heard this term and I loved the videos you did, and it helped me understand how to do this thing. But then once I went a little bit deeper into corn, it's a racket in Mexico. Yeah. I didn't realize like the way that Masienda worked and that they wouldn't let farmers have certain kinds of corn. And how was it easy working with that organization, I believe is in Oaxaca, to identify farmers, or is it still pretty like mezcal or like tequila, like super regulated?
It's a hodgepodge, man. I mean, I think ultimately, there has been work on the ground for a couple decades to document these kind of this variety of corn and this really like this genetic treasure trove of corn that exists in Mexico. It's like the entire seed industry that we know of today, this commercial DuPont, Pioneer, Monsanto, Syngenta. I mean, all those lines point back to Mexico and kind of where these materials were, either originate or were appropriated from. So there's been a large industry that's been feeding this for a while. And so with that comes like a lot of documentation and, there's a whole taxonomy that exists because it's, there's a commercial interest behind it. So that's been happening. And unfortunately, that's obviously caused a bit of a rift in that world where it's like there are the people who are studying this for the pure joy of documenting history and culture. And there's a bit of sort of like, anthropology that goes into that. Mm-hmm. And then there's this whole other world that's like, okay, well, in order to fund that research, we need people who, like these big companies to have an interest in doing so. And like, ultimately, all of the work that's happening on this sort of pure passion-based basis ends up becoming something sort of a part of a movement that is anathema to like what those very researchers are wanting. Yeah. So it's been around for a while. Lots of organizations on the ground, CIMIT being one of them. Then the Mexican government has its own versions of like what we know of as the USDA down there, right? So there are a lot of selfless researchers doing this work. And then the interesting thing to me is like, we only know about, when we say corn, first of all, most people think of like sweet corn, like that you eat on the cob. There's a big disconnect between that and like, the field corn that we actually use, it's what's primarily grown across the world. And then an even bigger disconnect that like, this has as much nuance as like, any little precious like heirloom tomato that we've got a cute name for, or bean, right? Yeah. Like, beans are becoming super popular. And it's like corn has been like this for a minute, but like no one was translating this to a commercial, conversation, like, or narrative that like people could actually access it. Yeah. I think that was sort of what was really compelling to me is like, shit, this is just as gourmet as any one of these things that we really take, seriously and like pay a premium for. Like, why shouldn't this be valued in the same way?
It totally. And I mean, that's one of the things to go back to mezcal is that where it is, what types of agave are used. Because the only reason I cite mezcal is because it's not only the most interesting spirit in the world. Sorry, the French. I mean, I love cognac and stuff, but it is. And mezcal, hands down, is. But
it's special.
It's super special. And I'm like surrounded by 4 sample bottles from Sonora, right? This is the other piece, is it's about where it comes from. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I read in one of the interviews you did is that what folks might like in Oaxaca in terms of flavor for corn, or to equate it to Santiago Matatlan, which is a specific style of mezcal, is different than what they would like in Estado de Mexico. Which tell me, how important is corn to Mexico if that distinction can be made?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's the origin story of humanity is like, inextricably linked to the origin story of corn, like man came from corn, corn came from man. It's, there's so much mythology and just like reverence that there are deities, that are dedicated to corn. Like it's bigger than food. It's bigger than, it certainly would never be thought of as like an industrial, byproduct of anything. It's corn is life, it's religion. The average Mexican eats, I think, about 200 kilos. I've read different accounts, but like one of the most recent one I've read is about 200 kilos per capita. a year. I mean, that's just insane.
That's insane. Knowing how specific you are with the types of, even though I know it depends on availability, because with the corn that you have access to is only surplus. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
But the prospect of making more income and having the available land, the meal plots and stuff, like, are many of these farmers like, okay, yeah, we'll make some more?
That is kind of the hope, is that, it's hard to answer this question without going into the kind of the complexity that's behind the whole system, kind of that's gotten us to where we are. But, just stop me if I'm going too much off path here. But, this has been something that's been consumed for millennia, and it's been a tradition that is passed on from generation to generation, as a subsistence crop, but obviously, as we've talked about, like something that has a far more greater significance than that. These folks are the kind of the custodians, if you will, of this genetic treasure trove we were talking about earlier. And it's 100% really, I mean, you think of it, it's like this living, breathing seed vault that exists in, plain air, across Mexico and other parts of Mesoamerica. That is, that's a big job that they're doing. They're really preserving an entire culture that comes with this staple. And what happens over the years that through globalization, I mean, this is amazing to me that, even as early as like the earliest 20th century, the Mexican government tried really hard to do away with corn as the main staple. Folks who were especially like Spanish sympathizers, who saw, wheat as like the most desirable, that was real people's food, right? Like the rest was sort of inferior or substandard. Like there have been a lot of attempts to thwart this tradition, and yet like it's survived. The biggest risk that it's faced over the last, several millennia, I think, has been through globalization and this kind of commercialization of the seed industry, where, all of a sudden, man, it's so complex. Holy shit. Just like trying to wrap my head around it.
But I'm smiling because, again, the reason I want to interview is not only because I love corn, but because of the parallels. Because in a way, you're saying corn was considered maybe peasant or lower grade food because wheat's up here. Mezcal considered peasant drink. Tequila up here, right?
Yeah.
And then tequila is what suffers homogeneity genetically and exposes it to the massive risk of just being burnt out by one little bug, and it's all at the sake of the government making this call, right? Has it been difficult not dealing with them, but working with them? And were they ever suspicious of your intents?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. From the beginning, I think so before Masienda, enter globalization, a lot of folks didn't have the same kind of capacity or bandwidth to work, these fields on their, that they've maintained for a long time, because family members were going across the border to find work. Just the effects of globalization, particularly NAFTA, that rift that was created in '94. There was a really unequal, uneven playing field, and it wasn't enough. Like if there was any local market that existed before, it was sort of obliterated as the corn just completely was dumped by the United States onto Mexico in increasing quantities. So we could talk about that for days, but like long story short, 94 is this watershed moment with NAFTA. You have a lot of folks leaving, and so less hands are on the production side, the cultivation side, which means that less is being grown overall, which means that this risk that something, one bad year, this is all rain-fed agriculture, there's no irrigation. One bad year, like you could wipe out an entire, strain varietal of corn. That coupled with the fact that anything that in a productive year farmers had, they would, try to sell. If you don't have a car to go to the market, each week to sell, however much corn you have throughout the whole year, and somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, I'll help you with that. I'll take that on consignment and I'll try to sell it for you." You do it. Like a lot of times what would happen is that they didn't have any options. They'd either get paid very, very little for that, or they would never get paid at all. Folks would just sort of make away and they would take that money and just that was it. So yeah, a lot of naturally, a lot of mistrust was developed and cultivated in these communities. And especially when we started talking about, the style in which we wanted to do this, which was, 100% cash on hand. There's no risk to the farmer, raising the standards for what we were going to collect. So, it was it was going to require some additional effort that wasn't something that wasn't a market norm there at the time. And be a constant presence year over year. That was like a really hard thing, I think, for most people to grasp. Not even just farmers, like the government, surely other companies think that still today. It's a leap of faith, I think, in a lot of people's imaginations, but one that, we work within a network today of 2,000 farmers, starting from a handful in our first year. That's a lot of folks who have the ability to participate in something different that didn't exist before.
Yeah. I mean, you've created an infrastructure like producers in agave as well. That's a lot of people, mind you, to keep in touch with, but are you able to be relatively in touch with the farmers, or is it all kind of worked through the government organization?
Yeah, no. So we don't work with the government actually at all. I think for better or worse, I don't know. I think it's intimidating, and I don't quite know how to navigate that. But totally open to it, but just hasn't really happened. No. So our relationship is sort of follows two tracks. We have individual relationships with farmers who we've worked with who are kind of just more autonomous in general. They either live in areas like, there's one of our partners that's about 3 hours outside of Mexico City. It's relatively, compared to Oaxaca and parts of rural Oaxaca, it's much more developed, right? He's still living below the international poverty line, is what's sort of whatever that means. There's a lot of metrics for it, but it's easier for him to produce at larger scale, because he's working less. By larger scale, I mean 10 hectares as opposed to, 1, or something like that. And also just not on the side of a cliff, that's overlooking a pretty steep drop.
Right.
Still no tractor, but he's got, it's a little easier to manage. But by no means is this looking like Iowa, the average family farm's 350 acres, all mechanized. So we have relationships like that where those are individuals who can kind of aggregate a little bit more of a varietal just because of what the landscape looks like and kind of what the social conditions look like on the ground. And then, in really rural areas, especially where Spanish is not the primarily, primary spoken language, we are working with groups on the ground who we've set up throughout the years, both in the form of co-ops. There's lots of, technical organization names that I'm not great with names if you can't tell. In terms of how these things are structured, but basically, essentially, they're all functioning as co-ops, organizing each year. We'll make announcements locally in the community, and certainly we've met a lot of these farmers. We don't personally know every single one of them. I think part of this is that we are sort of dropping in. We have a constant presence. We maintain these collection aggregation facilities year over year, but it's basically available to anybody who has and wants to do it. There's no contract. We don't require people to do it. So that means that there's some transient nature to it too within this kind of network that we work in, and we don't always get to know.
And so what I think is great about that, there's a real big mezcal company that got acquired a couple of years ago, and they make many of the people in this particular state, which is Puebla, sign a fixed cost agreement. So no matter you give me this much, and I'll always, despite how the market fluctuates, but I'm only going to pay you this. I mean, so these co-ops, then it's just how much the market necessitates that you would need to pay for the corn. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we going into a year, so we just wrapped up doing this for this year. We'll assess what are the prices being paid at sort of at the retail level, at the market scale or level. What are the prices that are being paid by increasingly now competing companies, which is really awesome. What is this whole constellation look like? What are farmers asking for? What can we afford? And we'll kind of go through all those points. And year over year, we've pretty much, every year there's been a bit of an increase depending on what the region is. But, especially lately, as more folks are getting sort of clued into why this is such an amazing, staple to work with, and why there's just so much potential for impact. It's awesome. It's changing, and it's definitely less we're not driving that conversation anymore. It's a range of voices, which is awesome. But dang, I forgot.
Yeah, no, that's good. So do you ever, when you talk about reflection and stuff, I mean, the way I view your work with Masienda since 2014 is that you made corn important for Americans, many folks in culinary. But do you ever look at it and say, maybe I was the guy? Maybe I was the guy that actually changed the dynamic of how people think about corn. And because you mentioned there's more competition now. There's a Gropa, which out of Houston. And do you take pleasure in that? Or is it more just like, I've achieved these things, I'm just going to keep head down, keep going?
I mean, I think the reality, like chronologically, is that we were the first to do this in this organized way. I think there's there's a methodology there, and like, for better or worse, we do consider ourselves as a leader just because of the scale at which we operate relative to some of the other folks in the space. And also just like, this isn't regulated, and it's something we've always been very considerate of since the beginning. Like, we want to do this right. You got too many voices, it's hard to make a decision. So we have to really kind of just go with our gut of what we feel is right based on the education we continue to receive around the subject. And at the end of the day, yeah, we lead, we lead to the best of our ability with that in mind. But also, not in a way to just sort of like, I think the biggest thing is leading because we know that a lot of eyes are on us, and also, just trying to keep the bar really high, man. At the end of the day, like, if we're not doing it, there's so much room, I think, for things to go wrong. And at least for our part, we learn and integrate anything we learn along the way that we, a mistake. We certainly try to make sure that those are being reflected in like a standard that moving forward, so that we're holding ourselves and everyone else accountable.
Yeah. And I think that's the commitment to quality is bar none. I mean, it's incredible products. I was curious because I've worked with customer service with y'all a couple of times. How big is the team over there in Los Angeles?
Oh gosh. It was honestly at the start of COVID, it was 2. Yeah.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yes.
It feels so much bigger.
I know there's like a little bit of, it's not intentional smoke and mirrors, but I think people think we're like this monolithic corporation, and like we just got like a request for a sponsorship for like a whole documentary series. And we're like, guys, like we are working through debt. We're working through all of these like small business things that probably aren't evident, but we were 2, like I said, at the beginning of COVID, we're 6 now full-time in Los Angeles. And then, we've got a team, close to 30 that we kind of work with throughout the year in Mexico across every region, that I think sometimes we even are just like, man, there's such a big constellation of folks that we work with who make this work possible.
It's crazy the kind of what perception, because perception is reality, as you learn. Yeah. And so if you are a badass, you just got to own it, right? If you are the leader in the industry, you just kind of have to lead that.
Right.
Yeah. One of the things that I think that, speaking to details, because to make the perfect table tortilla, which I've learned from you, and I've had them before, but I never really knew kind of the process. So I went backwards,
Mm-hmm.
What is it? Because it's so precise. What does it take to make the perfect puffing tortilla?
A perfect puffing tortilla really kind of goes down to 5 things. You want to make sure that you have proper elasticity. So that's, elasticity, because this isn't gluten that we're working with. It's, corn doesn't have any of that. You're working with kind of what's the natural gums in corn. It's all the skins. So you want to make sure you have some presence of those. If you're working with masa harina, there's a chance, like if you're working with our masa harina, it's already kind of baked in there. But if you're making it from scratch, like you have, which is so cool, you want to make sure you have a little bit of that to just make sure that, like chewing gum, like there's some elasticity to hold its structure as it expands. You want to have ideally a very fine grind. So again, masa harina kind of makes this all really easy, and has been done for you. But if you're doing it at home, if you're using like a hand cranked mill, you want to pass that nixtamal through like 3 times to make sure it's getting fine enough. And even then it could still get finer, but it helps. That fineness is what helps the, that masa to absorb moisture, which is the next factor that's super important to a puff. moisture, turns into steam once heat touches it. So a puff is basically like, if you think about it, it's moisture or humidity that's sort of trapped in the center of a pressed, uncooked tortilla.
Mm-hmm.
And once heat starts to hit it, it expands outward in the shape of a balloon. Ideally, if you're getting like a really, really amazing puff.
Yeah.
I'd say most people, I think, myself included, sometimes like can discount how big of a play that moisture has in it. And like if you're using Masienda or whatever, just making sure it's really properly, you're integrating as much water as possible without making it like sticky.
Yeah.
Super critical. Compression. Sorry, this is the fourth one.
I know.
This is a real thing.
Yeah.
So compression, if you think about like a ball of masa, and you just put that on the stove, not much is going to happen. You really want to make sure that you're sort of like limiting, you're expanding your surface area to be able to cook kind of in a really efficient way. And if you're getting something that's too thick, it might be hard for it to puff. You might start to kind of get areas that are drying out, before others or whatever. So like a nice press, honestly, just like press it nicely. Don't skimp on the press.
And y'all's press that I've got, Doña Rosa, is that right?
Yeah.
That thing fucking kills. I bring it out and like show people. I'm like, no, this is how we're gonna do it tonight. And it's
the shit, man. She does an amazing job. And like, I'm always like, people, especially as we've grown in this holiday season, people are like, it's a little rustic. You didn't say that, like, one, we did say, but like some people are like, you didn't say that it was going to be like a little, it's like a kind of like got this like edge that's not super refined. And I was like, it's Doña Rosa. She makes an amazing product. Like we tell people what this is, but it still does the best damn job of any press I've ever used.
So good.
Yeah. And temperature, that's the last one. So just making sure you got a hot enough surface to get a sear on both sides of that tortilla to lock in that moisture, and then like let the kind of steam do the rest.
So, because we're going to talk about the new product that because I love this stuff, but I bought a temperature gun.
Cool.
So
man, you're really nerding out on this. I love it.
Well, I wanted to know it, like.
I love it. No, I feel if there's a connection.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. And this, you don't even want to start talking about like making spirits and stuff. It gets to this whole other level. But I found that over 500 degrees Fahrenheit,
mm-hmm. I'm
in a comfortable zone to get that thing cooked quickly and evenly. Do you have any suggestions there?
I think you're right. So we'll do like a lot of the videos we've had to make, unfortunately, since we don't have a real kitchen in our office, is like on a little electric griddle, and like that barely gets to 400 degrees, and you can get like a little mild puff on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think like I'd say that temperature range is great. Getting in, if you have a gas stove, especially at home, like a medium to medium high heat, probably medium's a good place to start. It gets pretty hot, like around 500.
Yeah.
And then as you get more comfortable with it, you can crank up the heat and start to just, you don't stop. You're just banging them out really quickly.
But like making a mother sauce, like hollandaise is, you have to practice it. You know what I mean? But there is the way to make it. Yeah. And so what I really love why the table tortilla specifically, it is like one of those sauces that will break. It's one of the sauces that will not thicken if you do not process it properly. And that's why to me, it's such like this holy grail of corn, of corn, because you have to do things in a particular way or it simply won't work.
Yeah, it's as simple as being like corn, water, and lime, and yet like it's so complex. Like anything, like some of these simplest culinary staples that we kind of take for granted are like they're involved, man. You got to get to know them.
Totally, absolutely. All right, good. Well, I got to nerd out about the table tortilla.
Yeah.
One of the other movements I think again is very parallel to what you're doing is the growth of different heirloom corn whiskeys. Abasolo, which uses Cacao Azinzle, and then Sierra Norte, which I think uses the Olotillo Morado. Is that right?
I think that they use Bolita because they're getting mostly from that Central Valley. Yeah.
Oh, cool. How do you feel about having kind of a partner in crime, if you will, in the industry to help raise corn as well?
We have talked to, it's funny, when I wasn't sure what staple we would land on, like masa was the main focus, but like I was like, should we be exploring beer and spirits? I talked to Bertha at Casa de Aragones, and she was super into the idea of creating like a Mexican bourbon And, I just didn't have the bandwidth to pull it off because the supply chain became so much more of a beast, to kind of create and manage than I had expected. But we've always encouraged people to do it. And as I've been like kind of watching the spirit scene go by, I'm just like, man, everybody could be like, we're talking about Bloody Butcher, and like everyone's using the same thing across the board. If they're like, that's the one heirloom staple that everyone's using. And I'm just like, there's so much material here in Mexico that you could do that has just such a beautiful story to it and like so much impact. Why aren't we doing this? And so to see this happening now is super cool. We worked a little bit with Highwire Distillery on just getting some test batches back in 2014. And I loved what it did, just the nuance of like, gosh, I'm no expert in spirits, but like, I just thought it was really mind blowing. Just the differences in flavor from even batch to batch, but also just like based on this one input, like it makes sense, right? Yeah. Like, of course it would totally drastically change
there's a distillery up here in North Texas in Denison called Iron Root. That it's in Denison, and Denison's a sister city to Cognac. And so because we sent over the vines to save them during Phylloxera. And so it's been like this kind of interesting combination. But anyway, they use a purple corn that I was chatting with the guys the other night. They didn't know which one it was, but it was definitely from Oaxaca. And it gives you to your point, gives you such a different nuance. It's nuance is what it is.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, we work with, and also obviously the distiller makes such a difference in that too. We work with Workhorse Rye, and to see them work with some of the varieties that we worked with back when we had done some work on, with Highwire, it's like, there's so much range. There's such an enormous amount of range.
It's incredible. So before we talk about, because I got a couple questions left for you, but do you have a favorite? Not a favorite, but like if you're thinking you want something light with, how about this? A real heavy, rich protein, maybe picadillo or something. What corn do you think would make a good tortilla for that?
I mean, bolita to me is it's like the first love. And it's also it's the hardiest of anything we work with. They're like on paper, there are varieties that we work with that are denser, like, the tuxpeño, which is actually like what most of the commodity corns that we see in the world, like it's based on tuxpeño. I'd say bolita for me is like my favorite. You're talking about something that sees, works with all of the moles of Oaxaca. That's the primary corn that I think really, tlayudas are made of bolita. They have a lot of structural integrity and really holds up to a lot of sauces, and also just kind of like itself, like it can create a large format tortilla that is like, bulletproof.
Yeah.
I'd say that to me is my go-to, but there are of course many others. I mean, tuxpeño being one.
Tuxpeño is a real interesting one. I had a friend that I sent him some masa harina, and he made some tamales with it, and it looked really, really good. But one that I think is so delicate and beautiful that you guys have, is it Xocoyul?
Xocoyul, yeah.
Xocoyul, yeah, from the Rosado from Tlaxcala, right?
Yeah, that's like that's a part of I guess like the sort of the conical varieties that have a little bit larger of a kernel and lots of soft starch inside of them. Like you don't see those in commercial agriculture here in the States at all, because they're so soft. When they're going through a grain cleaner, they'll just break. Oh, wow. They're really, really fragile. And so that's just, one, it's stunning, and two, it's so beautifully delicious. Like, yeah, it's one of my favorites.
That's probably the one where you're like, oh, you don't think corn can taste different? Well, have a little bit of bite of this. And it's turned heads. Like my friend, she's one of the editors at Imbibe, and I sent him some stuff she's like, I'm going to make this kind of protein. And I was like, try the Rosado. I think that's going to be perfect. And she loved the taste of it. It's so beautiful. But one of the things I think that you've been really good with too, is you talk about the market, and you kind of understand the market that you're creating in one, but also is growing kind of peripherally in other things like whiskey. But these products are great, right? So this tortilla press is incredible. I haven't bought the blue masa yet, which I will at some point.
We're super stoked about that one.
Dude, it looks beautiful. And really, to me, it was the benchmark for which, if I could make blue masa that was fine and could puff, then like maybe I can meet that standard, But the comal, number 5 on your list of things, that these variables for making a perfect tortilla, how did this kind of come about? Did you see it as a market opportunity?
For us, like, I think we went in a lot of different directions for a long time, even up until, it started in 2014, 2013, thinking about all this stuff. Like I said, we've tried spirits, we've tried everything, and landed on masa just being this really underdeveloped, like really fun thing to tackle in the kitchen. And with each layer of the onion we pulled back, like, the press, to me, it was like, I wasn't really satisfied with what I was finding on Amazon or, any of these other places. Every time I would go to Oaxaca, we'd bring something back. And that's how the Doña Rosa experience happened. Like, it was just like, we were bringing back for Cosme, and, they wanted them and they fell in love with it, and we couldn't stop using it. And then we just decided to share it with more people. Wow. I think for us, the responsibility is like, people can't, I want this to be not even national, like a global phenomenon, and anything we can do to push that forward and get people thinking about this the same way they do with sourdough. Mm-hmm. And not just thinking about it, but like really respecting it and respecting the people behind it is my goal. It's like what makes me, keeps me up at night. It's what I want. And you can't do that if you don't have three things. You need the actual resources. So like the text, the information, the know-how to do it, which there was nothing. This is a largely like folkloric tradition that's been passed down, much like spirits. And you need not just the resources, you need the actual, tools and the hardware to get that done. And you have these comales that are in Mexico. They're great. They don't always pass muster for what we need to have here in the US, just based on like, just different standards across the border. And, little imperfections, as we're learning with the Doña Rosa's press, like those are also going to happen in other pieces of hardware we work with. So we wanted to make sure that, it was a little bit more sort of buttoned up for kind of a commercial experience, and made in. We love what they're doing. They're local, they're neighbors in your backyard. And, for us, they were doing such a great job on just translating kind of these tradition, based pastimes, and like just making them into beautiful pieces of hardware. And they were stoked about the idea of doing a comal. They'd never done anything like it before. And they jumped on it the second we suggested it. So we collaborated with them, and it's definitely a departure from what I was used to using, because I was used to use like a nonstick pan, but it's so cool having that. It literally does not come off of my stovetop. My wife doesn't love that, but it's
but that's, to create tools that you cannot be without. That's all you really want, right?
Yeah.
And I think that you've done such a great job of doing that with the press and the masa, which is where I started with this whole kind of weird, stupid curiosity about it.
No, nothing stupid, man.
Well, no, I know, but financially it could appear. I'm going to write it off now once I get the LLC and stuff. So, but it's just been so cool getting to hear about your story and just how deep you went into corn. And it's going to continue to grow. And I'm going to do what I have felt, again, like the passion I've gotten from you. I'm going to try to do that too. There's plenty of people that are really tired of hearing me talk about masa, but
you got to start making and selling it. And just
that's it. That's the next step. And I run a real big mezcal group in Texas, and like the hand in hand. So I was like, you're getting masa when you come to pick up these samples. You know what I mean?
That's so cool.
Just get people to do it. But so my last question, I got 2 questions left, and that's it. But taking it to mezcal, let's say it's whatever mezcal you have, and you're sipping it in Oaxaca, and you could have a drink with anybody, living or deceased. Who might you like just to pony up at the bar and have a conversation with?
I'm kind of feeling myself a little bit. I just got to do that recently with somebody. Betty Fussell, she wrote The Story of Corn, which is like a super, as you can imagine, it's a pretty esoteric book about corn. And as I was reading it, I was just blown away by the amount of research and like dedication to a subject. Like, I thought I cared. She is like on a totally different level, not just of like research, but storytelling. And I got to meet her. She's older now. I think she's in her early 90s, living in a home in Santa Barbara. And I got to talk to her a little bit, but I was just like, I was wanting to spend some more time with her and just learn from her in that process. And I'd say her, she's got me kind of wrapped around her finger. I want to know everything I can, and do right by it. She's great. Obviously, any hand that like figured out what the fuck to do with corn and like, how it happened. Like, that's just like, but I kind of like that there's mystery there and that I'll never know, like a part of me just kind of like, I love that we're going to always be trying to find out. So I'd say, alive, probably some more conversations just because I'm writing this book right now, talking to Betty Fussell, and dead, but very much still with us. Like, what happened that day? Like what happened? How do we start to do this? And like, just let's like lay it straight for us. Like, tell us exactly what went down that day or over that lifetime to kind of inform where we are today with corn and nixtamalization and masa.
Yeah, that's incredible. Well, so then the last question was going to be what's next, but tell me a little bit about the book.
The book's been a long time coming. I mean, I think, this is a very folkloric tradition, and it's one that is also has been sort of obscure, like despite the fact that we consume so much of this stuff, like anybody, like even people who are like, oh, I don't like Mexicans, it's like, one, it's not just Mexican. Two, you do, because you eat this like in almost more ways than you think, like Fritos, man, for God's sake. It's like, I wanted to write a book that I think just like illuminated how important masa is in our lives, and also just start to kind of connect some of these dots. By no means is it meant to be like a definitive book. It's a cookbook, but it has a lot of history and goes into sort of depth about, just origin and technique and process. So it's sort of like the first dedicated book to masa. And,
wow.
Like outside of a cookbook for a restaurant where it's like a couple pages on how to make it, it's like, it is the tartine, country loaf recipe, but like for making a table tortilla masa at home. And then a whole bunch of history and kind of fun stuff to dive into in between.
That's incredible. Any expected release date?
Yeah, we just, I'm editing the manuscript today, and there'll probably be a couple more rounds. It should be out early 2022. So nice. We've got about a year between us until that comes out.
That's incredible. I mean, it shows dedication and just mental acuity and devotion. It's incredible how you've done that for corn, and it's just the start.
Yeah,
it really is. So we're gonna keep fighting the good corn fight, Jorge. And I hope that when I can get to LA, or if you can get to Austin, we'll have an Mezcalito proper.
I'll be there. You can also sotol. I'm jealous I want the handmade stuff. So I'll be looking forward to that too, Mike.
My pleasure. A mallet works really well, as I found out. 8 pound, that and a tarp, it works really, really well. So
Jorge, tell my wife that.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, mate. And hopefully we'll get to do this thing in person soon. Thanks so much for taking the time out. I'll talk to you.
Likewise. Thank you.
Cheers.
So there we have it. Jorge Gaviria from Masienda, really steeped in food culture. It kind of drove him to start his own thing, to connect farmers and connect consumers and cooks and everything to better products as well. I can absolutely attest to the brilliance, the variety, the flavor, the complexity of all the different heirloom corn varieties that I've tried from Masienda. Probably 8 strong now, at least 8 different kinds of corn. And it's driven me to find my own place with corn and own passion for it too. To be ignited, to be inspired by each other, by certain people in certain trades, and to connect with them. This is something for me that's been so immensely important, especially when so many things seem gray and they seem overwhelming and they seem in complete disarray. They do not have to be when it comes to your passions. And Jorge made this very clear. He had a staff of 2, now he has a staff of 6. He's going to keep writing, he's going to keep exploring and bringing all of us closer to the people that make these amazing things, bring us back to nature as a result. So thanks everybody for listening to Show to V with Mike G. No matter how many times you do not get tired of watching Kitchen Nightmares streaming live on IMDb TV, yeah, that's pretty specific. Or if you're thinking, you know what, man, Chipotle's got cauliflower rice now, things might be different. Please keep thinking.